We all have experienced the morning rush. If you've ever been late for work before or had to get the kids out of bed because they're late for school, you're getting brekkie on the go, you're getting coffee on the go, you've got 2 odd socks on and only 1 shoe, and all of a sudden that coffee you've poured for yourself and taken to the car, it's just poured all over those 2 socks and 1 shoe. Next minute you're in the car, you're getting every red light in front of you and you need to drive like a Formula 1 car, but you can't because you just realize your petrol light is on. We've all experienced the morning rush. Have you ever felt like your life's just being lived at such this frantic, fast and hurried and rush pace? Do you feel like right now that hurried living is just getting you nowhere? Welcome to Beyond at Home. Over the last month or so, we've been looking at these keystone habits in our life that we can actually implement in order to get the most out of life. These keystone habits, these small routines or habits that people introduce into their life that carry over into other aspects of their life. And to help us learn more about habits that we can implement so we can get the most out of life, we've turned to the model of Jesus. And today, in our conversation, we're going to look at how Jesus teaches us how we can ruthlessly eliminate hurry in our life. But if we're going to talk about hurry, we need to talk about the pace of hurry too, because speed and going fast is so often something that's fun, it's efficient, and that pace can actually be really productive. If you think about it, no one wants to take a train that stops at all stations. We want to take a train that will get us to the one place as soon as possible. We want the express. When you think about how cars are sold to people, or even on ads these days, cars don't go from 0 to 100 in 50 seconds. They go to 0 to 100 in like under 5. When we talk about things that go at a speed, we admire it when we know that we can get things done fast. Click and collect shopping, express post. We can take a photo instantly. We don't need to worry about it being developed. We celebrate and we reward speed. I still remember when I was younger, skimming through books and trying to read them as quickly as possible, writing in worksheets as quickly as possible to complete them so I could be the first person in class to collect that prize from the front. It's within our society, it's within our culture. We celebrate and we reward speed because speed is efficient. Going fast can be fun. Speed and going fast can be productive. But I think one of the things we need to acknowledge is that if we celebrate and we reward speed, then what gets rewarded gets repeated. And one of the dangers of that pace of going fast in our everyday lives, or that frantic, fast-paced living, is the artificial urgency that comes with it. So often we can set ourselves these artificial deadlines or these key dates or key milestones in our life that we feel like we need to get to, that we feel like we need to accomplish or achieve at a certain time. And what does artificial urgency look like? Well, think back to your first day of high school. What was the one thing that maybe you were thinking about as soon as you arrived at school? When will I get out of here? When will I get my driver's license? Think of your first day of university or your first day doing your trade or that first job. You might have been thinking, well, what's the next step that I'm going to take to my career? I need to get there at some stage. Maybe you've thought before or even thinking now, well, at what time do I need to get married? And if I'm going to get married, then when am I going to start the family? Traveling. When am I going to fit traveling into this? I need to start doing the traveling before the family comes, or should I do it when the family comes? Or wait, no, I need to travel before I retire. I can't wait for retirement. The celebration of speed points us to these artificial deadlines, this artificial urgency that we feel. And it's the celebration of speed and urgency that I believe distracts us, that I believe actually encourages within us and cultivates within us this hurried and frantic pace in our rushed, lived lives. Because a frantic, hurried, fast pace is an assault on your soul. Hurried living points you towards being distracted from what matters to you most. And I don't need to tell you that. You know what hurry looks like in your life and you know what it robs you of. Hurry leaves you feeling frustrated, leaves you feeling forgetful. Hurry leaves you at times feeling like you've dropped the ball. Literally, you actually drop stuff from the car to the front door. Groceries go flying everywhere. Hurried living makes you feel restless and sleepless at night because you're always thinking about the next thing. What's the next thing I need to do? Hurried living makes you feel like you're not being the person that you're supposed to be. Because when we're in a rush, when we're living life at a hurried pace, the person who misses out the most isn't just you. It's the people around you. And for us as people, for you as a person, the things that we neglect are so often the things that we regret. The people that we neglect spending time with are things that we'll regret in our life. So what if your life wasn't centered on this hurried and rush pace? What if there was another way? This is the conversation that we're having today when it comes to looking at these keystone habits of Jesus and how he lived his life. How can we actually go about centering our life on ruthlessly eliminating hurry? What does that look like? And I actually believe in this conversation that even if you aren't a follower of Jesus, that there is something for you in this conversation and in this story that we're about to share in together. Across the Gospels, these documented accounts of Jesus' life, we see that Jesus never actually ran. He never hurried. He never kicked off his sandals or Birkenstocks to go for a quick sprint. Jesus always walked with his disciples. And we do read across the four accounts, the Gospels, these events of Jesus' life that have been documented and recorded. And we see that a lot of people did indeed actually run to Jesus. In fact, one of the people that did was a religious leader, a synagogue leader by the name of Jairus. You see, one day Jesus jumped off a boat after he what's it called when you go on a boat across a lake? A paddle? I don't know what they would have done then. Anyway, he jumps off a boat. He has a crowd of people around him at this time in his life, at this time in his ministry. He was really well known for his miracles and for his teaching. So Jesus kind of had this crowd of people around him. He's pretty popular. Gets off this boat and he's kind of packed in straight away. But in the distance, we see this religious man, this synagogue leader, come sprinting down, running to Jesus. This is what is recorded in the Gospel of Mark. And this man comes bowling himself over and falls at the feet of Jesus. This man's name is Jairus. And you see, this is pretty significant. This would have been a significant event in the eyes of all the people that would have been in this crowd in front of Jesus. And Jairus is at the feet of Jesus. Because for a religious leader, for a synagogue leader to be running in the first place would have been seen as pretty embarrassing. But for him to be pleading at the feet of Jesus would have been a big thing. But you see, Jairus wasn't running to Jesus out of artificial urgency. This was an emergency. His circumstance was an emergency. This was real urgency. But what we know about Jesus is that Jesus, even though his life was really busy, he never hurried. He always just went with people. And this is what took place in this situation with Jairus and Jesus, you see. Jairus was in a rush. He was in a hurry. There's an urgent situation going on. And he comes pleading to Jesus and he says to Jesus, please come save my little daughter. Please come heal her. And Jesus, this is his response, right? Because you think this is an emergency. Like Jesus needs to get to this little girl. Anyone would want to save this little girl. But what we see in Mark 5, verse 23, what we read is that Jesus just goes with Jairus. In fact, as we read about it, Mark's words was that Jesus went with him and all the people followed, crowding around him. Jesus simply just went with Jairus. He didn't take off in a rush. He didn't take off in a hurry. He didn't take off in a frantic pace. Instead of jumping on a mule or kicking off his sandals and Birkenstocks to go sprinting with Jairus to go save his little daughter, Jesus was just with this large crowd of people, his elbows out, just going along and just with Jairus. He just walked. But you see, within this kind of big story going on, within this emergency situation, there's kind of another plot that unfolds. There's a plot twist character. Because you see, in this crowd, this large crowd of people, there was a woman who had been bleeding for 12 years. And she'd been afflicted by all these hemorrhages. And what we read about is that she had spent every last one of her pennies trying to fix herself. She was an outcast of her society. She would have been known as someone who would have been unceremonially clean to the worship community. She would have been feeling so much shame. She's been trying to fix herself for more than a decade. She spent all her money trying to fix herself. And this woman in the crowd, she knows about Jesus. And she just says to herself, if I can just get my hand just on him, then I will be healed. So this woman who's in the crowd, as Jairus is trying to lead Jesus to where his daughter is, this woman reaches out. She reaches out and she just touches the edge of Jesus's robe. And what happens next is unreal. It's a miracle in itself, because as soon as she touches Jesus's robe, her bleeding stops. This woman would have been looking at herself all this time. She's been trying to fix herself for so long. And now her bleeding has finally stopped. And at that very moment, her hemorrhaging stopped. And Jesus, in this crowd of people, he would have been packed in like sardines, he actually turns around and he asks the question. He said, "Who touched me? Who touched me?" And Peter, one of Jesus' disciples, is next to him, and he's like, "Jesus, like there are so many people around you right now, like dozens of people have touched you." And Jesus says, No. I know someone touched me. I felt power discharged from my body. And the woman knowing it and realizing that she couldn't remain hidden any longer, that she couldn't hide anymore, she speaks up and she actually falls and she kneels, she trembles in front of Jesus, in front of all these people, and she blurts out her story of why she touched Jesus and how at the same time she was healed. And we see that Jesus' response, his words, is this. He says, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over. And some of the things we need to see here is first, just acknowledge that it was a risk for this woman to actually reach out and trust Jesus in the first place. And also there was like this countercultural barrier as well that Jesus kind of broke through to, even in talking to this woman who would have been seen as an outcast of the society. For a Jewish man to be talking to a woman, let alone someone who was bleeding, this is someone who was seen as unceremonially unclean. Like this wasn't something that would happen within this community. And despite that, Jesus was present in the moment. He was able to extend grace. This woman's bleeding was healed after 12 years. And Jesus invites her into a new life and gives her a new identity. He gives her the name of daughter. He invites her into family. After 12 years of trying to fix herself, she's given a brand new starting point. And you might be thinking like, wow, Riley, that's a really cool story to be happening in the midst of everything, like a miracle in itself, like her bleeding stopped. But then you might be thinking as well, like, what about Jairus' daughter? Like there was a other situation that seriously, like Jairus is actually in the crowd at this time too. Jesus is still talking to the woman. They're having a conversation. Everyone's like, wow, this is unreal. But Jairus is there and he still has to get Jesus somewhere. His daughter is still on her deathbed. Imagine being Jairus. You think that he'd be kind of going like, oh, wow, Jesus, that is great. But like, we have to hurry. Use your elbows. My daughter, you have to save her. And you see, by the time that they actually get to the place where Jairus' daughter was, the messengers of Jairus' house come to Jairus and tell him it's too late. Your daughter has passed. There's no point kind of disrupting Jesus now. But Jesus actually moves the messengers aside and he says to Jairus, he says to him, don't be afraid, just have faith. You see, at walking pace, Jesus goes and he enters into the house of Jairus and he goes with the crowd, he goes with his disciples, he goes with Jairus, and Jesus knew something that nobody else knew that day. See, he asked everyone to leave and only brought in some of his disciples, not all of them. And he said to Jairus' daughter, this little girl in front of him, he said, little girl, get up. And in that moment, again, there was an invitation to new life. Just as Jesus had healed the woman who had been bleeding for 12 years, Jesus had given this girl of 12 years old a brand new life. She got up. And this is crazy because really, what Jesus knew was that 12 years prior to this day when he'd be jumping out of a boat, when his schedule could have been as busy and as packed as he wanted it to be, he knew that just by going with Jairus, just by walking with Jairus at this slowed down pace, just by being present, even in the midst of this large, overwhelming crowd, that he would be able to extend grace to not just one, but two people that day. In the time when he was walking at pace where there was no rush, there was no hurry, there was no urgency, he was able to extend grace. And this is Jesus's pace. It actually permits him to share valuable time being present and extending grace, an invitation to a new life, to a new opportunity, to a great life, to both the bleeding woman and this little girl. And when we rush, we miss opportunities to experience God's grace. And we miss opportunities to actually invite God's grace into our life. Jesus walked at a pace that allowed him to both experience grace and provide grace to other people's life. So how do we develop and grow in this keystone habit of living out this pace of grace, of living out this slow pace of grace. Because here at Beyond, we believe, what's the point in coming to church on Sunday? It's not going to change you. It's not going to impact you for Monday. And we love to give you an application step to take into the rest of your week. So today's application step, next step coming out of our conversation, is to slow to the pace of grace. To slow to the pace of grace. To actually practice slowing. And you might be thinking, what does this even look like? Well, we want to give you some helpful tips. Some practical tips to help you slow to the pace of grace. These might sound crazy, but stay with me. Consider this. To help you practice and train in slowing down. When you see that slow lane on the highway, tuck into it. Go behind that slow driver. When you're at Woolies or Coles or at your local grocery stop, look for the checkout that has the longest line and stand in it with your groceries. Don't touch your phone. In fact, even when it comes to slowing down, don't take going to your phone and scrolling as a way of slowing down. Don't let your phone numb you out. When it comes to waking up in the morning, don't just put on your shoes that are already tied up. Make sure you tie up your shoes each morning by yourself. Don't just slip them on. Take that extra little bit of time just to slow down. Before you make your coffee to take away and jump in your car, before you make brekkie to take into the car, knowing that your crumbs are going to go everywhere, but at least you'll be able to get to work in that rush pace that you need to. Stop and eat and enjoy your brekkie before work. Enjoy your morning coffee by sipping on it outside. Some really simple tips on just how to slow down, and maybe you can think of more, but maybe you're thinking at the same time like, Reilly, you were just not selling this whole slow pace, slowing down thing to me. Again, speed is fun. Going fast is fun. Speed and going fast is productive, it's efficient, and it's powerful. We celebrate speed within our culture. But I don't know about you, but I know in my life, when I think of the times when I am doing things quickly, when I am in that frantic pace, I find myself looking at my little cousins, or at least one of my little cousins who I know just loves buckling in his giant fluffy sloth into the back seat at the exact moment we need to get to the cinema before we are going to completely miss the movie. I know, thinking about this little cousin, that whenever I take him to the park, knowing I have to get him home in time for his mum to pick him up, that he needs to say goodbye to every single turtle in the lake before we get back to the car. My little cousin who needs to make sure he's picking the right socks or the right shoes before we leave the house, knowing we're going to get to the place we need to get to half an hour to 45 minutes late. I don't know if you have a little cousin like me, or even within your own family. Maybe you've heard it before, even with your own kids or children. You've told someone, hurry, hurry, hurry. We got to eat your breakfast. We got to go. Hurry, you need to go to bed. Quick, hurry, come here, go here. In this frantic pace of hurry, we find ourselves in this space of rushing other people, of telling other people to hurry, even though we know that we won't get the outcome that we really want. See, there's something naive and something childlike about slowing down, about actually being present. And this keystone habit of slowing down, of slowing to a grace of pace, just like Jesus is, actually allows us to be present in the moment. This is a pace that offers a peace. It looks at intentionally doing things to remove hurry from your life. What would it look like for you to practice and train yourself in slowing down to a pace of grace? The bottom line is this: life is not a race. Live at a slower pace. Life is not a race. Live at a slower pace. Because living at a slower pace allows you to love others well, but even for those of you who are followers of Jesus, allows you to love God well. Because one of the things you never hear anyone say, and one of the things you would never say to yourself is like, wow, I really loved people well today because of how busy I was. Wow, I really loved my family well today, my colleagues well today because of how packed my schedule was. We never say that to ourselves. Life is not a race. Live at a slower pace. When we look at the life of Jesus, in fact, when Jesus handpicked his 12 disciples, when we read in the book of Mark of the occasion, what he actually did, in Mark 3 verse 14, Jesus was a master of being with, because his words to his disciples was this: he chose them so that they might be with him. Jesus chose these 12 followers so that they might be with him. And you see, it was just that simple, that they might be with him. How often? Well, when he was in front of people, healing people, when he was doing the miracles, when he was in big crowds, when he was on a boat. He said he wanted to be with them. He chose them so that they might be with him, even in the times when the disciples actually made Jesus' life a lot more trouble than good. He chose them so that they might be with him. See, Jesus was a master of shared experience. Jesus was a master of being present. And what we can learn about the keystone habits of Jesus is that Jesus always had time to be present for people. Not once do we ever read about the disciples saying, hey, Jesus, now that you're busy and you're doing all your things that you're doing, now that you have this whole campaign going for you and all these people want to know you and find out more about your teachings and all the rest, how come you never make time for us? We never hear the disciples complaining about the fact that Jesus didn't have time for them. Jesus was a master of being with. If you're looking at your life right now and the year that's been, the season that's been, and you felt like you've just had to react to everything that's coming up, you found yourself living that rushed and hurried living of what's next, what do I need to do? Oh, I don't have time for that person right now. If you want to change that part of your life and start actually asking the question of who am I becoming in the midst of this hurried and rushed living? How can I be the person that I want to be for the people around me? Take on this keystone habit of Jesus, of living at a slow pace. This is a pace that offers peace. It offers a presence with others and time spent well being with the people that matter most. Don't let hurry be an assault on your soul. Jesus taught us a lot about lessons, but in order to live out the lessons he taught, we need to live out the lessons that he lived. Let's do a recap of the last month, because one of those lessons, one of those keystones habits is silence. Actually finding a space within our day, within our routine, where we can get away and just be present with ourselves and with God. The second keystone habit is Sabbath, a time of rest that we carve out into our week so we can recharge and refuel. And the third keystone habit is what was modeled by Jesus, his life of simplicity, of having a simple perspective so we're not overwhelmed by the chaos of the world around us. And finally, the fourth keystone habit of a slow pace, of slowing. This is a pace where you can say yes to the people around you, where you can say yes to the experiences around you and say no to the distractions and the hurry. To actually love God well and love others well. If you want to live out the lessons that Jesus taught, then you need to live out the lifestyle that Jesus lived.